We'll start off at the top of the board here, the number 1 overall pick. I want to ask you kind of 2 questions with this. Who do you think the Panthers would take, and who would you take if you were in that position?
Well, good morning, guys. It's the same answer. It's Bryce Young from Alabama. I'll put it this way. I haven't heard this out there, but just my personal take on it. And this isn't talking to my guys in Carolina. I haven't talked to Scott Bitter about this at all. But I was at the Alabama Pro Day in the Carolina traveling circus. The 2 private planes and the 14 individuals from the Panthers that were rounds. We're all there, and I just find it difficult for David Tepper to be in Nick Saban's office in Tuscaloosa, to hear Nick Saban talk about Bryce Young like I'm sure he was talking about him privately like he does publicly. And I've spoken to Coach Saban about Bryce Young, and hear him speak as glowingly as he does about Bryce, and have that group, especially the owner, David Tepper, not be on board with the Bryce Young pick. I just find that hard to believe.
Jim, I couldn't agree more. And, as great as Nick might talk about Bryce is actually better than even Nick talks about him. Just listening to teams that spend time around the young man, how he's got this incredible visualization, memory of games and his preparation. He's everything you want in a franchise quarterback, except he's just not 2 inches taller. And I'm sure Nick dispelled the height from a defensive coordinator standpoint to David Tepper. I think it's a lock. He's the first pick in the draft. I really do. But I want to continue on the quarterback. You do a great job of bringing these quarterbacks to light. Are we sure there are 4 starting quarterbacks in this draft, or are we hoping there are 4 starting quarterbacks? I think Anthony Richardson's a year away from being 2 years away, so let's put that out there. Will Levis, there's a lot of conversation back and forth. But what do you see out of this quarterback draft?
Well, Mike, we might have 4 starters, but they might not be the 4 that we're talking about at the top of this draft. Might be a Jay Kaner from Fresno State down the line. We don't know, but I'm with you. I mean, history shows those 4 guys, the Richardson, Levis, CJ, and Bryce, they're all not going to hit. History has proven us that. When I get asked about Bryce Young, let me just bring it back to Bryce real quick there, and then I'll hit a couple of those other guys. I mean, the thing with Bryce is the height's the height. And I remember being in the draft room in Kansas City when Russell Wilson came out, and our GM, Scott Pioli, asked the room, like, is there anything we don't like about this player besides height? And all the scouts that graded Russell that year, I mean, we couldn't come up with anything. And Bryce is kind of the same way. This is a little bit of a weird comparison. But to me, with like Barry Sanders, Barry had that eyes in the back of his head quality. And so you never saw Barry take flush contact. I mean, the guy, that's why he was so durable. I mean, he never got hit hard because he was just so slippery. Bryce has that. If he didn't have that, I might be more concerned. But he has that eyes in the back of his head quality, so he feels stuff. He can dodge stuff. He can slip stuff. I'll say it this way. Tua Tagovailoa took a lot more heavy contact than Bryce Young did. But back to this class overall, I don't know if we're going to have 4 starters. I know you think Anthony's a couple years off. I think he's probably closer than I thought he was before I watched the tape. I mean, he's 13 starts is 13 starts. I get that. But he's probably a little bit closer. To me, Levis is a guy it's probably the most difficult eval right now for me, and just feeling comfortable where he's at, being talked about as a franchise level quarterback.
We're speaking with Jim Nagy, Executive Director of the Reese's Senior Bowl here on the Lombardi Line. Jim, let's talk about another SEC quarterback. That's Tennessee's Hendon Hooker. You guys invited him to the Senior Bowl despite him having the ACL injury and not being able to do the physical participation. What are teams saying about Hooker? We know that he has the A-plus character traits here, but are they really comfortable taking a 25-year-old prospect who's coming off of the knee injury in the first round?
Yeah, and that was a little bit of a departure for us. We don't like to bring injured players here to the Senior Bowl. That was the first time in my 5 years here where we've done that. But I just felt like Hendon was a special case. He deserved it. And then the quarterback position, because it lends itself to the classroom time and in the interviews, I really felt like Hendon deserved that opportunity. But he is a special guy. He's done a great job through the interview process. I don't think the age is that big of a deal. I mean, whether it's the Tom Brady effect, the TB12 effect, but with these guys playing later in their career and really extending years onto the back end, who cares if he's taken a couple of years off the front of his career and he's going to be entering the league as a 25-year-old? I think the league's comfortable with that. I mean, you stay at the same school. His teammate last year, Velus Jones, the receiver that Chicago took in the third round with the 71st overall pick was a 25-year-old last year at wide receiver. So I don't think the age is that much of a factor. And I just think there's a lot of first-round buzz right now with Hendon. And I see that because teams are going to want that fifth-year option. One of the years I was in Seattle, we traded back out of the first round. Minnesota traded up to take Teddy Bridgewater to get that fifth year. And I could see a similar scenario for Hendon landing in the first.
You mentioned this earlier, Jim. There's other quarterbacks. What quarterback do you like that may not – Baltimore, Eric DeCosta mentioned drafting a quarterback. He certainly didn't mention it at his pick. But he did talk about how he's been able to find quarterbacks in the draft, whether it's Derek Anderson or Tyrod Taylor. So what quarterback do you like maybe that isn't talked about in the first round?
Well, I do like Jay Kaner from Fresno State just because I think he plays the position well. If you just want to boil it down, like we're all into the pro day stuff and the workouts right now, but can they play the position with 21 other moving parts on a football field? I think Jake can. At a high level, he's got that clutch thing going on. I know you guys out west saw that UCLA game ago, but Jake was the MVP of our game. I think Max Duggan's got a chance to be a good player. He had really good moments here in Mobile. But bringing it back to the Baltimore Ravens, a couple of years ago we did not invite Tyler Huntley to the Senior Bowl that year because the Baltimore Ravens were the only team that gave us a draftable grade when we were going through our selection process in November. So to spin that to this year, Malik Cunningham now is a guy that really fits for them. Like that's the reason we invited Malik. We saw him as a better player coming out than Tyler Huntley, much further ahead. And there were almost every team had draftable grades on Malik Cunningham. So that might be their ace in the hole. That might be the guy in their back pocket that they feel like they could bring him in and get him on the field. Maybe if it's not year one, maybe it's an upgrade over Huntley by year two. Maybe play Huntley this year. And get Malik ready for year two and year three.
Now I'm also hearing, Jim, that teams working Malik Cunningham out as a dual threat quarterback, maybe play some wide receiver, have that slash kind of Cordell ability. Have you heard any of that?
I have. I actually talked to Malik when he was down here. Well, before we brought Malik to the Senior Bowl, we talked about would he be open to playing another position during the week, maybe practicing at wide receiver to show teams that. Now, we didn't get to that point because Malik missed day one of practice. He was ill. He got sick the first day, but I think he was the fourth or fifth overall fastest player with our on-field Zebra technology GPS stuff that all 32 teams use in their facilities. So that's guys. He didn't run as fast as I thought he would at Indy on a clock. I thought he was going to be 4.3s based off his Zebra times. So yeah, he's got legit dynamic athletic ability. So that doesn't surprise me, Mike. And I have heard that from a couple clubs as well.
The awesome part about this is Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl. He's going to hang out with us for another segment.
I got a whole bunch of questions for Jim outside the quarterback position. So, Jim, I really appreciate you sticking with us.
Yeah, cool. Quarterbacks move the needle. We had to start with those guys, but let's get to the trenches, the defensive linemen, the corners, the wide receivers. We'll do that on the other side as we continue talking to executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy. Talked a lot of quarterbacks in the last segment.
Yeah.
Let's get to the positional players in the trenches. That's where the game is won and lost, in my opinion. So let's go ahead and talk about it. And Jim, I want to start off with Georgia defensive lineman Jalen Carter. We know all the off-field stuff that's been going on with Jalen Carter, and it's obviously a tragic situation what happened down there in Athens, Georgia. But with a talent like Carter, who I believe is the best player in the draft, I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. Do you see him being a top 10 lock? Because we know he's not going on those visits outside of those teams picking in the top 10.
Well, that's the gamble that Drew Rosenhaus's agent and Jalen are making right now in terms of not interviewing outside that top 10 range. But, I haven't spent a lot of time on Jalen. We've had a lot of Georgia defensive players in the Senior Bowl the last 2 years. So obviously he's flashed. When you're that talented, you're going to flash on tape. But I haven't studied him like I would a normal prospect. I have talked to a lot of friends around the league about him, and that's the consensus that he's easily the top 1 or 2 or 3 most talented guy in the draft. But with the off the field stuff now it's sensitive. That situation in Athens, we got to remember. 2 people lost their lives up there, and with the racing stuff, but. Todd McShay got grilled pretty good earlier, whatever that was, December, January, when he came out with character concerns. And I don't think Todd was alluding to off the field stuff because there wasn't a lot off the field. I think he was alluding to some football character stuff. And now that's starting to come out. Again, Todd McShay's not making that stuff up. He's hearing that from people. Mike talks to a lot of people in the league. I talk to a lot of people in the league, and you hear stuff. When it's really there, you hear it. So. It's not just the incident that happened after the championship game, which again is a really tragic deal. There's some football stuff that the teams aren't comfortable with, and for Jalen's sake, I hope he's crushing these interviews because he's got some ground to make up.
No doubt. I think, Jim, what Drew Rosenhaus knows is his ceiling is Philadelphia at 10. I think he feels very comfortable that if Carter gets to 10, Howie Roseman's going to pick him. Howie's got Dean and he's got Davis on the team, 2 Georgia players. So he knows Carter from the player standpoint, which will give him a sense of comfort in terms of the football character and the off-the-field character. So I think Rosenhaus is playing from that position at 10. The guy I want to ask you about is the Texas Tech tackle Walker. A lot of people, he's coming off the injury. Right, he's got the ankle. I don't know how far along. He's not been able to work out, but we know he's got dynamic athletic skills. Where do you hear he's going in relationship to this first round?
It's in that top 5 range, Mike. And he was the guy that we had him accepted to come to Mobile for the Senior Bowl this year. And then he had a foot injury, which kind of kept him out. And at the end of the day, where he was being mocked by some of the guys around our game, who knows what his agent would have done and then let him come down here or not. But no, he's a guy we did a lot of work on, even going back to last spring. I mean, you're talking about a guy, he's got stuff you can't coach, right, Mike? I mean, that's all you're trying to do as a personnel guy in a lot of cases is just hand a player off to your coaching staff and give them things that they can't coach. And he's got a rare combination of length, which I want to say the wingspan going back to last spring, and my memory is like 86 inches, 35, 36-inch arms. And he's really explosive. It's hard to generate explosion when you have that long of a lever system, and he can do that. Right. And so there is upside. He's kind of just scratching the surface. If you watch the cut-ups, you get really, really excited. If you watch the game tape, maybe a little less so. But if you're grading the flashes, I mean, this is a guy that's got double-digit sack potential, and it got to be a really high-end player. And he's a high-character guy. He did come to Mobile. His agent brought him here, and I got to meet him a little bit when he was down here. And I've heard nothing but great things off the field. So you're talking about a high-character guy with a high ceiling. That's probably why he doesn't get out of those first 5-6 picks.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, I think there's a lot of conversations. You know how I feel. I think Will Anderson's a little bit overhyped as it relates to the great players, the Von Millers. I mean, Anderson had that great 2 years ago. He's and it's always hard with a player who knows he's coming out. That year, is he protecting himself? He's maybe not doing all that. But this kid, to me, is the talk of the top 10, the top of the top 7. I agree with Jim on that.
Yeah, Tyree Wilson with a chance to maybe go higher than most people think here. Speaking with Jim Nagy, Executive Director of the Reese's Senior Bowl. Jim, I'm curious about this next player, Bijan Robinson, the running back of Texas, because I feel like when we all watch him play, it makes a lot of sense. This is one of the best players in the draft, but where I'm struggling is the positional value at running back because those guys, it's hard for them to have lengthy careers playing into those second contracts. Where do you think somebody, when you factor in the talent and also the positional value, where should Bijan Robinson go in this first round?
Well, I just got around to watching Bijan earlier this week. I want to say I think we watched him in the office here on Monday or Tuesday with our young scouts. We're trying to watch some of these juniors, and gosh, he makes it look easy. I made the point on Twitter. He kind of looks like that all-state kid that maybe got brought down to play a JV game. It's just everything's so easy to him. He's just a natural. Everything he does, running the football, seeing it, feeling it, catching it out of the backfield, catching it downfield. So if we're talking about best players in this draft, I mean, he's a top 5 player in this draft to me, maybe top 3 player in this draft. And Mike hit on the Eagles' point with Jalen Carter, and I think that's a great point that they got Nakobe Dean and the big fella down there to help maybe Jalen Carter. I think the Eagles might be a landing spot too, because you look at Howie Roseman's past, and he's on record saying that like if you're doing what the rest of the league is doing, then you're falling behind. So he's kind of the mind frame. You got to zig when other teams are zagging, or vice versa, whatever that might be. I wouldn't be surprised if Bijan goes to the Eagles there at 10. That might make sense.
Yeah, it would. And I think we're making too much of this running back stuff, Jim, because if he's a weapon and he can impact the passing game, I say this all the time. Keenan Allen, it's okay to pay Keenan Allen all the money, right? He averages 10 yards a catch. But a running back that averages 10 yards a catch, nobody wants to pay that running back, right? And so Kamaro and the Dalvin Cooks and the Eckler, who are in that 9.6, and then they catch 100 balls and they average 5 yards a carry, that's a weapon. And so why pay Keenan Allen who can't make a big play, but you're going to not pay this back? To me, I think it's just ridiculous theory. I want to ask you about Seattle. I know you got a lot of familiarity. I have great respect for John Snyder. You talk about a guy who zigs when everybody else is zagging. John is real, and he could care less about the mocks. John could care less about the mocks, which I love the best. But what do you think they do there? My sense of it is they know they're picking an elite level. They're going to pick an elite defensive player.
Yeah, they haven't been up there in a long time, Mike. You know, I was there 5 years before taking the Senior Bowl job. And man, we were always picking in the late 20s, and they've kind of been in that range. So this could be their shot. This is what I'll say. If Will Anderson fell to them at 5, I think they would love to go there, even though they have really good depth on the edge. I mean, you look at last year's team, Darrell Taylor and our Chenna Nwosu both had 9.5 sacks, and then they really like Boye Mafe. But I think Will Anderson might be too good to pass up. To me, the wild card here is Anthony Richardson. You know, look at Pete Carroll. I think Pete's 71. He's a really young 71. Got a chance to hit a home run on a quarterback. They got Geno Smith coming back on a team-friendly deal. Maybe you have the ability to – you have a guy coming off a Pro Bowl season and bringing a guy ultra-talented like Anthony is. I don't think anyone can argue that. Is he ready or not? I think that's debatable. But is he ultra-talented? Absolutely. This might be the landing spot for Anthony Richardson. Seattle did a lot of work on the quarterbacks. They jumped around all these pro days as well. They fueled up the team playing, and they were in Gainesville. So this might be the spot. This might be the year. This is a good team. This is a playoff caliber football team. They might have the opportunity right now with John and Pete being stable in their jobs to take a shot on the QB.
The Seahawks right now plus 275 to draft a quarterback over at BetMGM. Jim, we got about 30 seconds left. Who's the best corner in this draft? Is it Witherspoon or Gonzalez?
I'd say Devin Witherspoon. Again, just the football player. I mean, Gonzalez is a great cover player. I mean, he plays man coverage great, but Devin Witherspoon's different when it comes to just the overall football player. I said this in the fall when we started watching the guy. Was like, very rarely do you get fired up about watching corners and run support. I could watch a run support cut up of Devin Witherspoon all day. I mean, this dude's got violent, ultra. That would be my pick, man. I mean, he's just too good of an all-around football player.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.